Hey, what's going on? Welcome to a new year and another episode of Angular Air, still going strong in 2023. I am Justin Schwarzenberger, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking about test harness. So it should be pretty cool. Learn some more stuff about that. That'll be really fun. Let's say hi to the rest of our team, and then we'll meet our guests, and we will get into the content for the new year. Join us today. We've got Alisa. Alisa, how's it going?
Hello, hello. Happy to be here and happy new year.
Happy New Year. Yes. Mike's with us. Mike, what's going on?
Not too much. Happy New Year to everyone present
Nice.
in chat here and watching, and also later on. Happy New Year. Even if it's like 2025 and you're watching this, Happy New Year.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. Somebody could watch this in the future. Right? I guess I can't watch it in the past, though, right?
Asynchronous AngularAir.
There we go. There we go. Our guest today is Alisa. Alisa, how's it going?
Just fine. Hello, everybody, and hello to everybody watching. Yeah, happy 2023. That way we can just preempt whether it's a new year or not.
Perfect.
Timestamp.
Great. Yeah, perfect. Timestamp. Yeah. There you go. There you go. Awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, Alisa, do you want to tell our viewers a bit about yourself, what you got going on, that sort of thing, before we get into the topic?
Sure. I am a senior developer advocate at Okta, and that's that authentication and identity group. And let's see, I am also in Angular GDE. I like to work with different women in tech groups, like NG Girls, Kansas City Women in Tech. And well, I do like watching K-dramas. I think that's my new pandemic hobby. So there you go. That's me.
And what is a K-drama?
It's really just a drama that is Korean. That's really what it is. But, I really like the really cheesy romantic comedy ones. Those are the best, like guilty pleasure type K-dramas.
Subtitles, or do you speak Korean?
I do not speak Korean, so it's subtitles. I should probably learn, though. I mean, at this point, it's been a couple of years. I should just pull up that on Duolingo.
Nice. And where do you watch those? Do you stream those from somewhere, or?
I do. Yep.
Okay.
From Netflix or Amazon, whatever. Yep.
Cool. Nice. Awesome. All right, we're going to be talking about test harness today, right? What are we talking about when we talk about test harness? Are we talking about like component test harness? Or what are we focusing on there?
We're going to talk about the test harnesses that's built into the Angular CDK library, specifically, so that it is framework agnostic for everybody to use. I mean, first of all, who doesn't love testing, right? I think that's just has got to be high up on everybody's list. Maybe after security, right?
Right. After security.
So when we do testing, of course, we want to make sure that we have full confidence in our applications, that it can withstand any changes that we have to make to it, whether it's new features or upgrades and such. And then testing gives us that confidence. And there's all different sorts of ways we can test, right? With unit tests, EDE tests, like runs the gamut. But either way, what we want to do is make sure that our tests are not brittle. And that's where test harnesses can come in and really help us out.
Cool. And you said CDK, part of the CDK. So that's the Angular material, and then there's the Angular CDK. That's kind of like the underpinning logic that material uses that we can use to do other similar functionality that like Angular material does, but maybe without the UI layer part.
Right.
Cool. And so, okay, so the test harness that we're talking about, that's in the CDK. So if we want to use it, we utilize the CDK and import it from there, right?
Right. Yep. Exactly. Now, the awesome thing, of course, is if you use Angular material components, then all of Angular material components also, since they have that CDK underpinning, they have test harnesses for all those components as well. So we could totally just use it right out of the gate if we have Angular material in our application, and that's starting in Angular v12. So you don't have to be on the latest and greatest. You didn't have to spend your holidays trying to upgrade to v15, right? If you're on Angular v12, you have full access to test harnesses for all of the material components, which is fantastic.
Nice. And so what is this? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I probably was just about to answer your question before you even asked it. So the value of these test harnesses is, especially ones for Angular material, is that since you don't have to rely on the internal implementation. So what this is basically an implementation of the page object idea of testing. The page object is taking bits of HTML fragments and then writing an encapsulation layer around it so that we don't have to dig around in the HTML and the DOM. Because I think that for most of us, whenever we talk about like UI-based testing, that's probably the least fun part. At least it's the least fun part for me. It's the part that's really fussy, I feel like. So yeah, Mike's like, yes, that is the fussy part. Yeah. So
no. That's Alyssa's fun part.
Oh, that's Alyssa's fun. Oh. Is that your fun part?
I'm sorry. Which part are we talking about, Mike?
The UI.
Yeah. It's the front of the front end. Yes. I was looking up I feel like I should at some point we should like point at the docs, because I'm looking at the component test harness in the CDK docs and I'm like, I didn't even know this was here, and I feel very embarrassed. So I just want to make sure, because so you were saying that you take specific pieces of UI and you wrap them. You also mentioned brittleness, and I feel like we should define that, because I'm like,
oh yes, good point.
Brittle? What is brittle? Okay, sorry, that was a lot.
Yeah, I think that brittleness can just be any reason why your test might fail, right? Which I think that it's
okay.
It could be run a gamut of reasons, I feel like, in the in UI testing, but specifically if you're relying on internal implementation of a component, such as a CSS class, to use for your document query selector and such, and that changes because the library author changed that out, then all of a sudden your tests don't work. That's one really good advantage of using a test.
I see. So when you say fail, you don't mean like the test passed, the test failed. You mean it's not like it's even further out. It's not doing its job. Like it's just not able to test. Like
it's
for that.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. It's not able to test. And also, some things with change detection could be a real pain too. And we can talk about this a little bit later, but test harnesses can help you with that and making sure that you're in good shape there too.
Yeah, it takes the idea of encapsulation, in my mind at least, it takes the idea of encapsulation that you utilize when you're doing your initial development, not so much the testing aspect, but the idea of, hey, I'm going to use this component. I don't really care how it works. I don't care what it does. I'm just going to use this thing, whether it's a button, a grid, a table, or whatever it is. I just want to use this thing. And when it comes time to testing, I've already said that I trust this because I'm pulling it in as a dependency or saying I'm going to use that. So I don't really care how you work, but sometimes you need a little bit of how it works in order to write your tests, your UI tests.
Okay.
And this kind of says, no. We're going to encapsulate that too. So you don't have to worry about it at all. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. So for example, if we talk about like a login component, right? I mean, once again, Okta. So I love talking about signing into things. So if you talk about
security and testing.
And security, right? Security and testing.
Right. So if you talk about login component, like you normally would put in your username and password, right? And you'd have these input fields. But with a test harness around it, you don't even need to know that you have an input for your username and an input for your password. And maybe you have like a forgot the password link or something. You don't need to worry about what those are because your test harness can encapsulate it to say, you just call a method like login or set username or set password, things like that.
Okay. Oh, cool.
I think a lot when I think about like the test harness, I also think about things like Storybook and Playbook or Playground, things like that, where the idea is that you want to run this component and you need it in isolation. So you're not running it in the midst of your app, but that component is going to have dependencies that it needs, like we talked about, right? So it's the idea of like you got to put some layer in there that can say, hey, I want to run this component, and it depends on these things. So I need to throw these things in there to make it happen so that I can run it on its own, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. So lots of really great advantages on how test harnesses can help keep things a bit less brittle, more robust, less changes needed, and honestly, just less fussiness that I don't like personally, digging around in the DOM if I can help it. So not having to rely on class names or even like the order of HTML elements would be fantastic. And also the HTML API, right? Like if you just set For example, if you have to add your username to that input, then you have to like kick off an input event from the HTML you pay for to trigger and get picked up by change detection and all that. And if you've written tests in Angular, you know what I'm talking about, and it could be kind of a pain. So we could streamline all of that.
So in the example of talking about like testing the login form, if we wanted to write some tests, and let's say we wanted to test that the username field, takes and throws an error on a certain, format of like it requires an email. So I want to test the login form and make sure that there's a email message or an error message saying that, hey, the username should be an email. Is that something that we use a test harness for? And what's kind of like a concept there of how we would use it?
Yes. So if you are using the Angular material components, then you would have the test harness around that each individual input, so it would be for like your text input, or maybe you have it as an email input, or you have it as a part of a Angular form, right? Form control. You would be adding the tests around that. If you can go like at a higher level, so let's say we're not talking about a fragment of HTML being the just one HTML element, we're moving up higher to a component level, you might write a test harness around your individual component so that it encapsulates whatever you might want in your login page, right? So it's not just whether it's email for that one text input element, or it's, let's say maybe it's two controls, maybe it's the email plus a submit button or something like that. So I think it's really flexible in terms of using the test harnesses from Angular Material, as well as creating your own test harnesses around your own components that really allows you to do whatever makes sense for you. And I think that's where we get into like that opinion based about testing, right? Everybody has a lot of feelings about.
Are you saying most people are going to be like, oh, you do test harnesses that way? And then there's
Right,
going to be like a whole
exactly
tussle.
But I think that's a really good point that deserves restating, is that component or test harnesses are not just for Angular Material. They're a concept that you can utilize and take advantage of within your own applications. And it doesn't mean that you have to have your own component library of, hey, look, we did our own button, we did our own checkbox. It doesn't have to be that granular, but to the point of, hey, we created a login control. We created a common search box that we use throughout our entire application. Whatever components you're creating, especially shared components, really can take advantage of test harness to be able to.
Test harnesses are related to components.
Yes.
So not like, here's my test harness around this directive, right? Like, what's the
Good point.
Wow.
I don't know. I just, the docs say component everywhere on the component harnesses. And so I was like, oh, maybe
pipes too, right?
But
I want to test my directives and I want to test my pipes.
But maybe it's not allowed. Maybe it's one of those things where you're like not supposed.
Or maybe it is.
Yeah,
I mean, a component is a directive, right?
Right. That's why I hesitated. I was like, oh no, it's you're right. I think I've only ever used it for for actual anything that has an HTML element associated to that view. I don't know if I've ever done it on thought about using it in a directive or a pipe.
Can you give the test harness? I guess I need some more clarity on what is the test harness? Like, is the test harness providing the implementation of how to test that particular code and providing some surface to make that easier, but then you're still putting your test harness in a test that you write? Or is the test harness the test itself too, right?
Well, you definitely could test your test harness. I mean, there is I don't know, some sort of level of inception there, test inception, right? You're testing your test harness. But yeah, it's, all right, now I have some homework, I think.
So if I wanted to say I need to test, I have a login form component that comes with the email field, the password field, the button, right? And I want to write some tests around that, right? Like I said, I want to make sure that when I use it, that login form component is showing an error message if the person does not put an email address in that field. So I want to write a test for that. And I'm feeling like I should use the test harness. to do that because maybe there's some dependency in my login form of some validation library that I'm using. So I need to maybe mock that or whatever. So I want to use a test harness and I want to write a test for that. So let's say just from that standpoint, I'm going to write a test where I'm going to assert that, given a user enters a non-email in the email form field, they should see an email error message. What's all involved in that from top down?
Okay, so for that, well, I think one thing you've touched on this with talking about it with the login component. I think the smaller your component that you want to write a test harness for, I mean, it's just general good architecture practice anyway. But the smaller your component, the easier it is for you to write a test harness for it. That said,
right?
So pick a simple component, and when you do this, you would use the CDK libraries, like test libraries that's in there. So so we talk about documentation is probably, I will mention this documentation a couple of times. If you go to material.angular.io and click on the CDK, there's a CDK section. There is a reference on how to use the CDK library to create your own component test harness. You would derive from their base class, the component harness base class, and then you would add your own implementation by using their like base methods to capture the different UI elements that's on your component. And then you would define what the API for that is, such as setting the username or setting the email. And then you would also have like maybe set email, get the email, things like that. So you want to have a nice small API surface that you would think about for this component. And then you could also add like searching, I guess we'll call it filtering queries. If you want to filter it down to all of the login components that have a certain email address, you totally could. And then once you have this test harness, though, then you will bring that test harness into a separate test that you write for it. Let's say unit test, just for ease of communication. Here, let's say you set up your test bed, you bring in your test harness, and you can then write tests against your test harness to verify that you're seeing the error show up properly.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So like all that work, like if I was to write a spec file for a component and I'm doing all this DOM selection and all this input, like you mentioned earlier, like having to fill out the input field and clicks and things like that. As an author of that component, I could go and use this test harness to give that testing API surface, make that available so that it's easier then to write those tests, because now the test author doesn't have to do all of that underpinning stuff of figuring out the DOM selection, all that stuff. And it's simply like, use the test harness and fill out the username, like you said. Okay.
Yep.
And then that comes with that kind of lives with your component that you've created, and then it's available there for writing those tests.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Yep, exactly. And other people, is like, as Mike mentioned, if it is a shared component, then any other component that utilizes your component that you've written the test harness for could then use that test harness in that testing as well, right? So you got all these layers, I think, is one of the reasons why this is a complicated topic, but also a really flexible and exciting one, right? Because you could have all these different layers of components and test harnesses for it and testing for it.
So I had a background process running in my head about the idea of whether or not it's just components or directives. These are exposed, and I was looking through the docs of component harness on Angular's website, and one of the test harnesses they mentioned is button. As far as I know, the button component from Angular material is not a component, it's actually a directive, because it doesn't actually replace the button tag. You still use the button tag and put mat button, mat raise button, what have you on it. So yes, I would say component harness does work off of directives as well.
Yeah, yep, absolutely.
Or test harness, not component harness.
Yep. So in that harness, are you also able to provide ways to do like dependency mocking, or would that be separate from the harness? Like, is the harness more about UI interaction and less about the actual, like my login form component took a service to do the login, and I needed to mock that, right? Is that something I could do as part of that test harness to bundle that together?
I've only used it for like the UI elements. I don't think, and I'm trying to like think through the interface or the API for that base class, the component harness base class, and I'm not sure there is a way to add a service to it. So I think it's really just the UI elements.
My gut says no. That's not a test harness thing. That's a matter of working with something inside of the component itself. Whereas setting up a dependency like that would be overriding a provider and therefore done when you configure your test bed.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. So the harness is really about the interaction with the component that we're putting the harness around, or potentially directive and whatever, right?
Right.
Okay, and utilizing the API of that, or any DOM interaction, that sort of thing, UI interaction with that.
Right. Yeah.
Makes
I
sense.
think it's mainly for just wrapping whatever you see in the HTML that you need to that you want to encapsulate. Yeah.
But I think these tests, correct me if I'm wrong, are more behavioral and less UI, meaning does it do what I need it to do versus does it look the way I need it to look?
Oh,
Yes.
so if you wanted to test like accessibility for things like contrast, you wouldn't use this? You could use.
I'm not saying that you wouldn't use test harness, but I think there's some different tooling to use aside
Okay.
from the behavior of, hey, when I enter something into the input and hit enter, then
Yeah.
I'm actually getting an event back out
Okay.
through the output. Yeah.
Okay.
But I could see the accessibility and things like that being there, right? Because harkening back to Alisa, what you mentioned earlier, when you mentioned like, oh, well, you know, there's a CSS class name and that could change. And when you mentioned that, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm trying to think about where does that mean? Where does that come into play? And this discussion right this moment is like, oh, that's clear, right? Because the test harness is like, I need to select this. If you didn't have the test harness, somebody could write the spec selecting based on that class name, right? And that class name changes, it's irrelevant to what you're trying to test. Now you abstract it away using the test harness and say, hey, you want to select this. Here's the method through the test harness to select this component. Under the hood, it could change whatever the selector is, right? So from an accessibility standpoint, you could do the same thing. Like, let's say you wanted to test that there was a label for a screen reader on your component, and maybe the underlying component uses the ARIA label at one point on one element, and later it needs to change it to another element, right? You could use the test harness to expose a way to select and confirm that. And then under the hood, you have the freedom to change your DOM or whatever, right? So I could see that you could probably do something like that as well for accessibility and things. It just, again, providing that API surface for making it simpler to say what you want to test, and leaving the implementation of how to get to it under the hood. Makes sense to me. I don't know. Kind of seeing it.
Yeah.
It's cool. So like when you're writing a test harness, are you putting that in a separate file? Are you putting it in a file like right next to your component TS? Like, how does the management of that work?
Yes. So I think, I mean, I had been following Angular materials like file structure, just to keep things more simple. That way, when I look at Angular's code, it's more, it's not at all similar to mine, but it's laid out in the same file system as mine, right? So what they do is for every component, they create a test folder that has the test bed, or has the test harness files in there. So they'll define that test harness implementation as well as tests around the test harness.
Gotcha.
And I think if you take a look, actually I have it up. If you take a look at materials code, you could see, well, maybe I won't actually be able to, oh, there it goes. I've lost focus on this on one WebStorm. There's like, if you go into like material button, you'll see a testing folder. So that's how they organize it. And I think it makes a lot of sense to have it all in that same layout and the same, all right there with your component.
Got it. So that would include the spec files for the test run, as well as the harness and any code that's used for that.
Do you want to show it off? Should we show it? Should we show the test file for the button? I kind of want to see it.
I can. Do you have a share set up, or do you need me to do it?
I do
think-
not have it up. Do you? Does
I
Alisa?
have it up, but I have so many things
got
up
you.
also on my machine. I think it would take me a little while to
To
get
clean.
it
Yeah, right.
organized.
Okay, so let's see.
Thank you,
Where
thank
Is
you.
this where you're
is-
looking? I was just in the component harness under CDK.
Support change section. So she was actually looking at like the button material button file itself. What, like,
The code, the code in their repo, in the material.
the
Repo.
It's a
GitHub.
GitHub button. Does that
Click
take
that.
us? Have
Okay.
okay, like
Yeah.
total sidetrack. Have any of you tried Copilot?
I have not.
No, nobody has. Okay, all right. Well, when you do, you must tell me how it is.
So you haven't either.
No, I'm just super curious, and he clicked on a GitHub button, so it brought it up.
Material. That's what I was looking
Yeah.
for.
Button.
Button.
Mike, can you enhance a bit, please?
I can.
Thank you.
Is that good?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank
Hey,
you.
look, it's me. Sorry.
Yep, so there's that testing.
Testing.
Where?
folder. Yeah.
Oh my. Oh my.
So yeah, I love like looking at the code, right? Looking at Angular's code. It's so wonderful. So yeah, so you can see how the implementation works with that. Well, they have extra layers of abstraction, but it's that component harness base class that they'll extend from, that you would extend from if you're writing your own, and then from there, add your API, and then you would also have your test files. Should be spec files inside of this testing folder as well. It's really hard when you have like tests of tests and then different tests and then tests.
Right. I wonder what the management experience is like over the life of this component, right? Because I think that's something that everybody kind of talks about when you get to testing, and it's like you're now managing not only your code but also the test, and it's almost like it's under another version of the code, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that goes towards the idea of learning how to write tests and how to write testable code, and those things can all help in that experience of then making it easier to manage it over time. But it's still a struggle that a lot of us face, right? And so now with the harness, it's like another layer of code that we have to keep maintaining. And so if we get to a point where we say we got a simple change, like not simple, but let's say we perceive it like low effort change of a class name in the component. But now we've got to touch all these other files to make it work. Right now, is it more work than to just implement that feature? How does that get balanced?
Ooh, yeah. So
I
I
don't
think
know.
we're into like that opinion and experience.
Right.
Yeah, I was about to say, if it were me, I would not writing as much as I think test harnesses are, the bee's knees. I wouldn't write a test harness immediately for every component, right? Just because you have that maintenance. I think you need to have like where that balance is might be different based off your project, on your team, on your like longevity of things, or how you're able to manage shared code. But yeah, I think that there is definitely I think it could differ from every team, and I think that's definitely opinion and experience based. But because you do have to manage what is the balance of making it easier to test or maintaining these test harnesses and test for these test harnesses.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that goes back to the idea of these like atomic components that are completely reused all over the place, that there's lots of reuse, that you get that value out of doing that versus, all right, maybe I only have 2 data tables. Doesn't make sense to do one for our data table component, but
yeah.
I agree.
Back in the day when I used to teach like test-driven development and do talks on test-driven development, one of the things that I really drive on that, and I think that I kind of lean towards this for this issue of having to tackle like the maintenance and stuff and kind of the things you're talking about in terms of the value of testing. Like when we take the journey of doing test-driven development, I feel it helps us understand how to write more testable code. And we get in that pattern of doing that just out of the gate, but we learn that by doing test-driven development. And if we can then apply that when we write all of our other code, we may not be writing test coverage for all of it, but most likely we're writing, code that's easy to maintain and pretty safe and fitting in these patterns. So it's almost like we get that benefit out of having that mentality of how to approach writing those. That then if we do want to write tests, it becomes, a little bit easier to maintain because they're already kind of, structured in that way. And if we don't, we feel pretty confident that we've written some stable code. So I don't know. That's kind of how I kind of approach that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I feel like this has to be a conversation every team has, right? Like what?
Right.
But
Right.
I absolutely agree with you. Like I think the key that base is writing the testable code. Without that, you don't. You're stuck. You can't. You don't have any place to go from there.
And then I wonder, like Justin, you brought up TDD. Does it make sense as if you're getting started on a larger project and you're going to have reusable components that you want test harness working for, and the component library may be in development as business logic is also in development? Do you potentially start off by writing the test harness first? And this way you're not blocking any of the other team members from writing their code and their tests. They essentially just have like empty components as the shared components for the component library, and just have a test harness for it and have that all stubbed out so that you can provide those harnesses for testability to not block the business feature development.
But you at least need like markup for it, right? Like something to point to in order to start writing a test.
But
No?
do you?
I don't think so. I think you can just get away with defining the API.
Oh.
I mean, you could just do that and just like for right now, let's say
these are my inputs, these are my outputs.
Yeah, and then change it out.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I see. Oh.
That is super fascinating because when you think about sorry, I'm like excited. When you think about test-driven development, right? What you're trying to do mentally is you think about what's needed for the API surface of what I'm writing, right?
Right.
Because your mind, and I always go to the address form fields, right? And if I'm left to my mind to just say, I'm going to build address form fields, what do I need? Like I'll go, oh, well, some addresses have address line 2, some have address line 3, some have like all these things. So I'll build out this rich thing. And the requirements might be like, look, we only deal with address line 1, so we don't even need it, right? So it's about understanding like, what do you really need the API surface of the thing that you're building to be like? And when you do TDD, you really define like, I need to confirm this works. So this is all I need. I just need to reach in for one thing, not the other. So the test harness provides that API that you're talking about to say, this is what the user is going to be doing with this thing. So now when I go to develop the component, I just need to care about those things, right? So wow, that's totally could, it's like lead you into TDD if you do harness first. Sorry, I was excited. I get excited about
the new proposal, the new best practice.
HTDD?
HTDD. Nice.
Or THDD? Yeah. I like
another acronym.
I mean, and that may be like a niche scenario of teams that are creating a component library at the same time the feature development is happening. So it may not be a scenario that is necessary, but the mindset of trying to decipher and decide what the API structure is going to look like and define what those contracts are. This is how I'm going to talk to you. This is how this is going to talk to that. To define that up front, and that also facilitates the idea of breaking up work across multiple people.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw a wrench into that.
Ooh, wrench it.
Conversation. Yes. Because I absolutely agree. I think that having that like API first mentality is really, really great. And we've been talking about having, and I'm advocating for the smaller components to write your test harness for. But test harnesses aren't limited to unit tests. You can have a test harness for E2E testing, which of course is, now we're talking about much bigger HTML fragments, right?
I'm gonna get excited again. I like E2E. I like E2E. I like Cypress. I like that idea of doing that. Yeah, that's really powerful. Okay, so let's talk about that. How does that work? Like if I was going to do, let's say Cypress, right? And I wanted to, from my Cypress E2E coverage, I want to utilize the harness to select things and do things in my UI.
Mm-hmm.
You can write, so depending on what your needs are, of course, you can write a test harness around all the components that make up your the view of a page if you're looking at an entire page, or you can write one around the whole thing. Because yeah, I know it's like
This is
right,
exciting.
why would you? Yeah.
No. I can see that though. Like if you
yeah.
have complicated, page, like your entire view, right, has a lot of pieces and they work together, but you're trying, like, just like you said, you're trying to keep those components on their own, like small, easy, right? But you need to compose it all together. And at some point you need to wire them together and make them work together. And you want to have coverage for that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And because the that component harness base class that you would, extend from to create your own test harness implementation, the selectors in there, you don't have to only select by a HTML element. You can select from another test harness. So you can totally compose.
Mm.
And I get it from, so I kind of am a little bit against that from the idea of a full E2E test. I love the idea of an E2E test of essentially this is the user sitting there interacting with the browser and making that drive the application to do that. But the scenario of like an integration test that's somewhere in between a unit test and a full-blown, hey, this is the user sitting here typing without having to go with anything that a test harness that may be slightly different in behavior to what the end user might experience. I worry slightly about that.
You're saying that you can't possibly build this like compiled test to be exactly like what the user's seeing? Is that what you're saying? Or did I get it?
Developers aren't perfect either, but to have your test be completely disconnected from the code and have the E2E test interacting with just the browser, not interacting with anything else, saying, all right, I need to click on this button and to be able to do that behavior.
Yeah, that's a really important point, I think. I feel, because like the way that I kind of approach E2E and like Cypress coverage and things like that is I want to try and have the Cypress coverage that's written be totally agnostic of knowing anything about the app. Just like you mentioned, Mike, that like the only thing that knows about is what the browser is rendering. That way, you can have that separate. You can run it in different environments. When it starts to have knowledge of like this component exists over here and what it is and how to get to it, now you're coupling your E2E too much with it, right? But so I was all excited. I'm like, wow, this is cool. I just thought of a value of the test harness there, and then Mike says that, and I'm like, no, I want to back out of that, but I'm going to say it anyways, because one of the things that I'm kind of sad about in like Cypress coverage or E2E coverage, and this goes because like I love the web, I love HTML, I love this in the world that we're in, and I like championing the web. So when we talk about like E2E coverage and this need to help make selectors easier, and like Cypress does this, right? Like out of the box, like Cypress will look for things like data-test attributes, right? To make it easier, then you can use their UI to click and say, oh, I want to use this, and it'll give you the selector, and it's shortened because it's like data test, right? I don't like adding additional text to my DOM when I don't need it for the application to run, right? So data test, to me, you're adding an attribute. It's adding additional text size to your DOM, and it's purely for testing. It's not for what the consumer uses. And yeah, it's one-off, but then you add it to all your components and all the things in the view, and it's complex. Yeah. Now so from the purist in me, I'm like, I don't want to add something specific for test and ship it to production.
Right.
So then I'm like, well, the harness could maybe be something that then abstracts that away, right? And so now you're like, the harness is like, oh, just go fill this out, and the harness knows how to find it, and it can find it by whatever you're shipping to production.
I still don't think I understand Mike's problem.
So as a user,
yeah,
I'm having you go to Google and search for something. I'm not telling you to go find a text box that has a particular class that has anything else.
Right.
A user clicking on something. And I know there's a little bit of difference between automating that and actually having a person do it, but having that automation know too much about your application can be problematic, to the fact that it may have more information than the user will have to make sure that the application functions as you intend.
Okay.
So, like, if I gave you,
And
Alisa, if I said,
I want to make one other point real quick, that I understand your hesitation going back and forth on that, Justin, of an additional DOM and what have you. But I think that the two pieces could play nicely together, that if you did both, that you had tests that were, hey, this is the user doing it, versus, hey, we just want to make sure that the flow works. We know about the application, but to maybe use those in conjunction and do both approaches is probably the best way. Who knew? More tests is better. More meaningful tests is
more meaningful.
Right. Meaningful.
I see
Sorry,
it like
cut you off, Justin.
that. No worries. I just get so excited too. Talk about stuff. So like let's say that Alisa, I said, hey, I want you to write EDE tests for my application. It's available in production. Go for it, right? The only thing you'd have available to write those tests would be whatever you select in the DOM, whatever's delivered to you in the DOM in the browser, right? So you could inspect that, you could find tags, you could do your query selectors and everything like that, right?
Yes.
If I wrote test harness stuff to do that, you would have to know what that test harness code is when you write your E2E, which would then also require you to import those test harnesses in your E2E code that you're writing. So now that would be coupled with
it would for sure. You couldn't just have your test harness stuff living over here and then do your EDE the same way you've always done your EDE, ignoring the test harness stuff. Like, couldn't
you could ignore it. But what we're saying is, like, let's say we wanted to use test harness to make this page easier to test, right? We wanted to abstract away and say, oh, you call a couple things and you could fill out our login form and check your total accounts, in there or whatever. But if we wrote that test harness and tried to say, well, we're going to use that in our E2E, then now our E2E code that we write would have to import the test harness, and now would be tightly coupled to our application code.
Right.
Whereas if you have the E2E where it just cares about it's hitting a URL and then reading the DOM and testing the DOM, then it doesn't have any knowledge of the actual underpinning application.
Okay.
And that's the challenge. I see but there are scenarios like we have a bunch of stuff where it's like a widget, like we call a widget that's like a mixture of components that's a compilation of a widget that does some stuff, and then that widget is used in like a page or somewhere else. And so the ability to test that widget on its own now becomes, it's maybe E2E, it's kind of that gray area, but now it's like maybe the test harness around that can provide us value of covering that in this way. I could totally see that.
Yeah, layers and layers upon testing. That's the answer.
And I think that I'm going to it. I think maybe some of us are going to it too. Like I think maybe we jump too soon on well, how do we solve all the things, right? It's like, okay, just let's just do it a little here, get a feel for it, and then it'll reveal itself of like, oh, I don't want to do it here. Oh, I ran into this, struggle in this coupling, so maybe we need to not do it so much there. Part of it's just diving in and doing it and trusting that we've had the experience and the skill that we'll learn it as we go into it, right? Well, those things will reveal themselves, and don't worry about solving it all up front. I do it a lot. I try and solve everything up front, and it's like, okay, relax, just go for it, dive in, right?
Yeah. Now, I think this is the most fun part, honestly, of working with developers and having these sort of conversations, right? First, you get to the what is test, what is test harness, and then you can get to the how. And that how is so fun.
That's when everybody starts telling their stories, right? Being like, this is what we do, this is what we do, and this is what we hit. Yeah. That's cool. So let's see. I'm trying to think of what are the things that we might need to really point out on the test harness.
Did you want to talk a little bit more about testing the test harnesses, or because if you're going to be exposing and say, hey, this is how you use me in a test to, Okay, bye. That you can or solidify to make sure that the code that you're exposing for other people's tests is completely valid. And is that something that you have practiced with your usage of test harness, or is that I'm using test harness, I'm exposing a test harness, but I'm not necessarily testing my harnesses that other people use to test their code?
Let me make sure I understand what you are asking. Are you I'll try to repeat it back to you, and you can tell me where I've misunderstood. Are you saying that you're wanting to talk about writing tests around your test harness to make sure that just so you have full coverage of your test harness, or that how other people be? Okay.
Yeah. To essentially validate that your test harness is functioning the way that you expect it to. Or is that too deep of a level to go?
Do people actually do that? That sounds like an insane person is writing code to me. But like, we're testing our tests to make sure they're testing properly. Absolutely not.
Pause.
Really?
Put my foot down.
I
This
think
is insanity, and we cannot support it. Absolutely not.
I think you have to at some level. Yeah. So that's just where that test inception comes in. You have to test your
Right.
test, right?
Justin,
And
can you
then
bring up the screen? There we go. This file.
it's kind of like, was it the
you got your button harness spec file.
When
enemy
I
of the
saw
state?
that, because you
Yeah.
pulled it up on GitHub,
Who's
I'm
watching
like,
the watchers? Like
why is there a test file
Right.
for the test file? That hurts my soul.
What's in there,
Okay.
Mike? Click on
Yeah,
it.
click on
it,
it.
Mike.
I must see it.
No, it's a broken URL, 404.
Oh. See, even they tapped out and we're like, nah. No, just kidding.
What am I looking at? What does it say? Hang on.
Run harness test.
What is that? Can you find that method? Run harness test? What the heck is run harness test?
Come on, let me navigate
Click
to
on
it.
Sometimes there is.
To click on it with the button.
No.
Click on it.
I don't feel like going all the way through that. So it's running, it's giving it the module and it's giving it this to actually run. All right, I guess I got to go to this thing. Material button testing shared spec. Oh, it's right here.
Ooh, hello, shared spec. Let us look at you.
Hold on, let's see how much we're getting into here.
You think it's a lot? I've
Let's
seen
read
worse.
the its. What are the its? What's it trying to do?
Oh, they jump straight to the its.
All right, so it sets up the
Should load all button harnesses. Should load button with exact text. Should load button with regex label match.
Yeah.
Oh God in heaven. Okay, so you all, let me get this straight, are for testing your tests. How deep? I mean, because then you could test the tests that are testing your tests. How far are you all willing to take this? I just need to know.
I think it depends on how much you love testing. But
Yeah.
Well, I
at
feel
least one level. At least test your test
one
harness.
level.
That's,
Test your
yeah.
Okay.
That's kind of where I'm at.
Oh my word! I'm just baffled. Baffled.
You want to make sure that the API that you have around your component, in your test harness, at least work as you expect. I'm not sure I would go into like every single, like I might pick like one happy path and maybe one unhappy path or something.
Right.
Do you see what Q said in the chat? He said you guys should look into SDETs. They're devs that test tests for a living.
Oh yeah, software engineering test. Yes.
Mike, do you think you're thinking about testing the test, harkening back to your work on schematics and testing the schematics?
Yeah, I do test my schematics. Actually, it's one of my favorite parts about writing schematics. To give you an idea of where I'm coming from lately, I was defining a component and I was manually creating it. And my style URLs was component name.html. So I was wondering why my styles weren't working because I wasn't actually loading it. So
oh yeah,
I'm at a different level of doing things wrong.
I've been there, man.
Mm-hmm.
Where I was like, why won't this work? And then I was like, oh, nobody in the application knows about it. I just wrote it and then went on my merry way. So
like to the point that I wrote star color blue and nothing.
anything, right? Turn it blue.
Right.
I even put an important after blue.
oh my god, you put
Nope.
it important after blue, even after 6.
Yeah, I needed to make sure that it was.
Like, I gotta know because somebody in my application's gonna be overriding everything blue.
Yep. I should have used lime, but yeah.
I mean, my eyes have been open towards the dedication that some developers will go to, and I say bravo, but also wow, that's amazing. Are there question for things outside of test harnesses, so just like any testing in the world, do those all have this architecture of testing your tests? Or is this just a test harness thing? Like,
I think that if you have a wrapper around whatever it is that it's some encapsulation layer,
yeah,
you
then
probably
you have to test it.
have tests
Okay.
for it. Yeah.
So
So let's
'cause-
say, I don't know, should I think of something else? You have a class that has composes of other classes. You're still going to have a test around that top level class.
Okay.
because don't think of a test harness as a test. It's a different exposure of your
what, like a
component.
selector? Like it's like a way to select. It's not
Mhm.
okay. So it's not really testing tests. I see.
Exactly. So you're testing a thing that's facilitating testing, not so much a test.
Well, okay, but wait. So in the code where it has like the button and it's like button harness or whatever they called it .ts, in that file, you're saying there's no test in that file specifically for the button. It's just the selector.
Do you want me to bring that back up?
Mhm.
Because
It
I
is
thought it
just
was
an
a long
encapsulation
file.
layer around it. Yep.
And so we can't put our tests in there because we like they don't belong in there.
So
Belong
Well,
on
look
put
at
in
this
your
one
dis-
highlighted here.
Okay.
Is
Okay.
disabled, and it's doing a little bit of help here, but it's getting the attribute of disabled from the component.
Because I was reading these comments as you were scrolling through, and it was like, get a promise for the button's label text. And so in my mind, I was like, cool. So it's testing that it has label text, but it's not. It's
So
just
this would be like going in and saying, hey, go get me the button element that
Mhm.
may or may not have this class or whatever selector you're using to find the button.
Yeah.
Button's kind of an easy example, but hey, which button are we talking about in that case? And then checking to see, does it have the disabled attribute? And then you're using HTML DOM querying to be able to find that versus using TypeScript to say, hey, I just want to check to see, is this thing disabled? And maybe it's doing some other tricks or adding classes or whatever to set it as being disabled.
so you can think of the test harness file as like selecting the different states of the thing, like kind of, right? Because like whatever it is, if even it's not a button, let's say it's a form, an entire
Mhm.
form,
Okay.
then we're gonna have to think of like the different like states your form could be in, and those are how like in the file, like if the form is disabled,
Yeah.
if the form doesn't have a user, and so it's like grayed out or something. Like you have to think of these different cases, and then you're like essentially creating selectors with this test harness for that case.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then you can even see like click. So it's not just getting the state of it, but also interacting with it. So
Oh, it is interacting with it?
Yeah, not just
What-
nouns, but also
What is it doing with it? It's just
it's calling click.
Clicking it.
well, so that would be testing it, right?
No, this is a lot providing you as the consumer of this to be able to click the component and encapsulating how a click actually happens into the harness versus you trying to do it through the DOM.
So like if your click opened a modal, right, and the test was when I click this button, the modal should open, right? The harness is giving you a way to tell it, hey, click, and oh, hey, give me the modal selector. The modal is open, and then your test would say, do the click, and then assert that the modal is open.
But so you're saying like when this file runs that Mike's looking at, the click doesn't happen, or it does happen, and then it happens again in the test file. Like what?
The
Who's-
test would be calling this method on the harness, say
Oh,
click,
that has
and
the
then under the
click.
hood, the harness would
Oh.
actually do the click.
Okay.
Rather than you writing document query selector and then whatever the button is and then dot click. You could simply just say harness click. And then if that query selector ever changed because the component implementation changed, the test wouldn't need to change.
Can you show us
because
in
you're-
the test file, Mike, where click is being called, or where like it's like actually like telling it to make this happen?
Maybe. Remember, it was in shared. Let's do a
Was
search
it?
in here.
Was it in shared?
Nope.
It's about
So
click,
it finds the harness,
Uh-huh.
and then it calls click on it.
I see. Okay. No, this makes sense. It isn't testing your tests. It's just testing your harness. I get it now. I understand. Okay.
Right.
I just had a kind of like a big light bulb going boom.
I saw it.
We're writing more maintenance to simplify our maintenance. Right? So a test harness is saying like we're doing some maintenance writing, right? But we're making it so it's easier to maintain our tests going forward.
So what you're doing is that maintenance of what you're doing is building up a resilience layer around the shared pieces that the foundation of your application, right? All these things that are going to be everywhere throughout your application. You want them to be as strong and robust as possible and allow those that are using that to write tests in an easier way, which also allows you to refactor things later on because you have that layer of abstraction around your component, like Material does, that the whole MDC effort that happened recently of using web components.
So Christian said something, and I actually saw page object in the docs. So I'm thinking they're accurate in their assumption, but maybe you could highlight it and point it out of like, it is. Sorry, I just joined. So component harness is like a page object in E2E testing just for components, and we could reuse them in E2E tests, right?
Yes, a component harness is the idea of that page harness, just with like Angular material or CDK backed implementation of it. And then you can use those component harness in ED tests or unit tests or integration tests only, and unit tests only if you're Mike and you don't like them in ED tests. But I mean, fair enough. Like that's how to test. There's that thing again. But yes, that's the idea of that is based off of this idea of that page object, which is just HTML fragments. How small that HTML fragment is, what that HTML fragment is, like that's where we have like all the fun conversations.
Right.
I love my span component.
Did you say spam or span?
Yeah, I heard spam.
Span with
N.
N.
Have you all ever tried canned ham? Not spam. Canned ham.
Picks her later.
I don't know. We're at the top of the hour, so picks might be now.
Yeah, you answer my ham question.
No.
I guess we better get to the wrapping up. Alisa, so that we can use the test harness right now if we use the CDK or if we use any of the material, right? And that's how we can kind of get started using the test harness.
Yes, that is exactly how you get started. And you want to do this because as Mike mentioned with the MDC effort that came out in Angular v15, if you wrote your test a while ago and you're relying on that internal implementation of Angular material components, it might be your test might break, right? So this is a good opportunity to make that transition over to using the Angular material component test harnesses, or write your own test harnesses as well, whichever you'd like. But using those test harnesses will really help you out in getting onto Angular v15 or Material v15.
Material v15. Cool. And like it's low cost for us to try that out, right? Like, I mean, we should just dive in and give it a shot. Like you can try a little bit of it, maybe it doesn't work, no big deal.
Right. You can just do it in one test. You can do it for one component. Like you can have just your button use a test harness and all your inputs still use a document query selector. That's perfectly cool, you know?
Cool. Yeah. So get in there and try it. I'm gonna try it. Awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap things up. Let's do some picks. If anybody has any picks, and then we can call it a day for our first show of the new year. Anybody on the team have any picks? I do, but I'll see if you two have any.
Go first. I went somewhere.
He went somewhere. He's gone. He's no longer with us. So I've been really enjoying the Star Wars shows. I just got to them. I think Justin and Mike, didn't you watch them like a year ago? Like
I watch them all the time. So which one are you talking about?
Well, I'm watching Obi-Wan.
Okay.
Oh, the Book of Boba. That one. That one's the latest one. And I'm really enjoying them. We have a backlog of shows, so like we're just going through the list. That's why I didn't wait. Like it's just, as you know, we can only watch so many things at once. So yeah, that's really good. I'm enjoying it. I kind of wonder, like, are shows the new movie? Like, is that where the world is heading? Yeah. Are we all assuming? Okay, cool. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
To me, it yields better storytelling.
It does. And I would much rather have it, like, because you don't have that, 2-3 hour cutoff where you have to cram everything in. So I would much rather, it makes me sad though for the original movies, because I feel like there was a lot of story we missed. Like we were just kind of shooed past. So, but no, I love it. You guys should try it if you have time.
Nice. It's interesting because like the 2-hour format now is at like a short form, like we used to have short films, and now we had full feature films, right? Now it's like the feature film becomes the short film because we have these series. I don't know. I always I check what my daughter's doing, and she's just watching people stream. So like, I don't know, maybe movies and film will be gone completely.
No, you're right. Yeah.
But there's the opposite side of that, is that you've got these ideas of like these content creators that are creating these YouTube videos that were 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes long, are now down to creating TikTok length shorts that are
30 seconds. Yeah.
So,
well, because I was like, I was waiting on something to build, and I was like, oh, this will probably take 30 seconds. So I pulled up a TikTok, and it literally took the amount of time for like that 30 seconds to go by. And I was like, what does that say about me as like a attention span?
Wait, that you were able to watch a singular TikTok video. That's commendable.
Mike, did you find a pick or picks?
No, I was looking into the test harness for input, and I was looking at focus, because I think that's a big thing and a hard thing to implement, or not a hard thing, a complicated thing to implement if you're not trying to use native elements to be able to focus an element. So I was looking at that and playing with, or seeing how that was going. Do I have any picks? I haven't really been doing a whole lot aside from playing video games. But I will make a pick, yes. The holidays just passed. I was fortunate enough to have the entire week between Christmas and New Year's off. So my pick is take time for yourself, get away from the keyboard, and do other things aside from just coding.
Cool.
But still code.
Yeah.
Cool.
That is a good pick.
I have 2 picks.
Oh, yeah?
I'll wrap mine up real quick. Angular Material is actually one of them, so it was really fun. And all the latest and greatest that's in there, it's just, and the CDK is like so valuable to take a look at it and start leveraging on so many fronts, right? I think early when Angular Material came out, it was kind of this, it's the material design, and now I'm stuck in that. Do I really want to take that on? But there's so much goodness in there, and even the ability to skin and theme the material design. Like it's not about the material design; it's about all this functionality that you can just get out of the box. And so it's really amazing where it's at, all the stuff that's in there. So I want to plug that. It's funny because we were looking through some of the code, and you saw that there was like the coerce Boolean function and things like that. And that was one of the things I just picked up a little bit ago. This ability to say like our input fields, right? We don't have any way to really like strong type those input fields on components, right? And so there's these helper methods now that the CDK, I think CDK exposes, that we can use to help, ensure that true false as a string is actually a Boolean and things like that. So that's really cool. And my other pick is the show Cleo on Netflix. And I am just like blown away by this thing. It's a foreign series, so it's in German. I watch it in subtitles, but it's just amazing. The cinematography is amazing. The storytelling is amazing. The acting is amazing. I was just blown away. So Cleo is my pick for shows watching.
Nice. What are you watching it on?
Netflix.
No.
And it's got like one season right now. It's like 8 episodes.
Oh, why you do this to me? You know that like Alyssa
I
needs
know.
to binge one season.
I got
One
all my
season?
friends are doing the same thing. They're like, "Have you watched this?" I'm like, "No, I got a backlog of like 30,000 things.
Oh, yeah.
I got to prioritize, right?" It's like my test, like what's important and
Well,
what.
I will get
way.
back to you in a year and tell you how good Cleo was.
All right, there you go. There you go. All right. Elisa, do you have any picks?
Yeah, in terms of like TV shows, I just finished watching the new season of the Amazon's Jack Ryan. I'm a fan of
That's
Jack
on the
Ryan.
That's in
who
the
isn't,
queue.
right?
Yeah,
So, yeah, that was pretty fun. It was a lot of really good plots in there. I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. We had having to watch the whole series again. Had been too long,
Oh,
and
I was going to ask
remember.
that. Like,
yeah.
Yeah,
We do that where we'll pull up like a recap that somebody's made. And if we get like too far into the recap where we're still lost, we're like, we gotta rewind.
Yep. Exactly. And then I think, my other pick, so not tech focused, is since Alyssa mentioned it, is Spam. Spam is pretty awesome.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes.
I haven't tried canned ham, but yeah, Spam.
I just keep
do like
seeing it
Spam.
at the store and I look at it like this. Like, I'm gonna try you one day. Like, I don't know. I should just get it.
it's like the test harness. Just try it. Like you can have a couple bites and then be on your way, and maybe you want to do more of it.
I love you
Yeah,
guys.
if you do get Spam, I don't know if you're talking about trying out Spam or is it canned ham. I haven't tried canned ham, but if it's Spam, make sure you lightly fry it.
Oh,
So you
don't
can-
just be like open.
Yeah, no
tin.
spoon like to the can. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's how I do that to many foods. I don't know if it's laziness or if it's better that way. Like, like peas, you can just right out of the
Mhm.
can. It's so maybe not with Spam though. I'll heat it up. Mike is like, absolutely not.
I'm done. I'm out.
Oh, I cannot tell you how grateful I am for you coming on today. This was such a neat episode and I really, really loved it.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This was a lot of fun to chat with y'all.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Elisa, for coming on. And we might have to talk more in the future about more test stuff. For sure.
Yes,
So let's
please.
figure that out. Awesome. All right, that's a wrap. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Kicking off 2023. Let's get some more shows later.
Yay!